Deep in the Swiss Alps, a spa exists where people are admitted to treat their illnesses. The spa holds many unknown secrets, unaware of the actual purpose of the treatments given to them. At a large financial company in New York City, Morris works alone in the middle of the night. An unbearable pain halts his work, and he goes to get some water. However, the pain turns into a heart attack and he collapses on the floor. On the way to work, Mr. Lockhart rides a train, is busy with his laptop and phone, and displays a rude attitude toward the train conductor. His obsession with work and rudeness prompts a kid across the seat to draw an evil stick figure while looking at him. Later that day, the company's board of directors, Hank Green, Hollis, and Wilson, summons Lockhart. He reads a note sent by the company's CEO, Roland Pembroke, who has impulsively opted to stay at a wellness center in Switzerland. Pembroke writes that he has found the truth while he's away, and that he will never return to the darkness, referring to the corporate world. Lockhart thinks that Pembroke suffered a breakdown and lost his mind, to which the others agree. Their company is expecting a merger which will make them one of the largest firms on the East Coast. However, their books include specific abnormalities, and the board requires someone to take the fall for this. Given the letter's content, the committee intends to blame the abnormalities on someone who is insane, referring to Pembroke, but they require Pembroke's signature for the transaction to be completed. They hope to send Morris to collect Pembroke from the far-off spa, but since he died, they're sending Lockhart instead. The following day, Lockhart arrives in Switzerland and takes a cab to the famous spa. The cab driver, Enrico, wonders why a young man would go there when most clients are usually older. Lockhart tells him that he's just visiting and even insults Enrico for being just a driver with no ambition in life. Enrico remains humble since his father taught him to live a happy and simple life. Lockhart then remembers the time he visited his mother in a nursing home. She was crafting a small music box with a ballerina inside. He shared news of his promotion and promised to transfer her to a much better nursing home. However, his mother sensed that he wouldn't return, even when he reassured her that he would. His mother gave him the ballerina, which Lockhart always brings with him. Suddenly, a villager throws a drink at the car as it rides up the hill where the spa is. Enrico shares how the villagers have a violent relationship with the folks on the hill. It started 200 years ago when the Baron married his sister to maintain his heritage, leading the villagers to revolt and burn the Baron's sister alive along with the castle. After the long drive, Lockhart finally arrives at the spa filled with old people wearing white robes. They all enjoy the different recreational activities that the place offers. A nurse greets him at the front desk only to inform him that visiting hours are over. Annoyed, Lockhart demands the manager's presence and signs the papers the nurse hands him in hopes of having his request acknowledged. While waiting for the manager, Lockhart goes outside to check his phone, but there's no signal in the area. Later that day, Dr. Peterson greets Lockhart at his office. When the doctor learns that Lockhart intends to bring Pembroke to New York, he refuses to let them meet. Lockhart is determined to see him and plans to return tomorrow. While heading out of the spa, Lockhart spots a young woman standing at the edge of the spa. Suddenly, a wild deer appears on the road, causing the car to crash over a shallow cliff. Before losing consciousness, Lockhart remembers his mother's burial. Meanwhile, the wounded deer walks along the road before dying. After 3 days, Lockhart wakes up inside the wellness center. The spa director, Henrik Vollmer, welcomes him and informs him about what happened. Lockhart panics upon realizing that his leg is in a cast. Vollmer assures him that they already told Lockhart's company about the incident and advises him to rest and hydrate. Lockhart checks his watch, but it runs out of battery. As he drinks the water, he notices a parasite floating and crushes it with his fingers. Lockhart sneaks out of his room and explores the spa, where he discovers more leisure activities. A nurse notices him and wonders if he's lost, to which he nods yes. He acts disoriented and claims his name is Roland Pembroke. From her records, the nurse tells him Pembroke's room number and his scheduled steam bath. Finally, he meets Pembroke in the bathhouse, but the former CEO doesn't want to engage in business matters. Lockhart begs Pembroke to return with him and assures him that he's in good health. However, Pembroke insists on staying and heads to the swimming pool. Pembroke remembers Lockhart's father and feels guilty about his death, as they blamed him for the company's shortcomings. He believes Lockhart also has the sickness because of his selfish ambition, and he needs to be cured. When Pembroke comes up from the water, he seems different and suddenly concerned about the company. He finally agrees to return to New York. Lockhart immediately changes his clothes and asks the nurse to call a cab for him. While waiting for a car and Pembroke, Lockhart meets Victoria Watkins, one of the old patients. She loves solving puzzles and spends most of her time doing crosswords and studying history. When Lockhart mentions the history of the Baron, it interests Watkins and tells him that she will look into it. A little while later, Lockhart follows the girls humming and finds Hannah, the young woman he saw before the accident. Lockhart wonders why she's at the wellness center as she appears so much younger compared to them. She explains that she was diagnosed with a unique condition. She asks if Lockhart comes for the cure, but he denies it, saying that he's leaving the place. Hannah tells him that no one ever goes because no one wants to leave such a wonderful place. She continues humming as she wanders away. A few minutes passed by, but still no cab arrived. Lockhart becomes impatient and looks for the nurse at the front desk. When no one answers him, he checks Pembroke's room, but to his surprise, the nurses and staff are fixing his room. Enraged, Lockhart confronts Vollmer, who's dining with the other doctors and patients. He asks where Pembroke is, to which Vollmer responds that Pembroke's condition worsened. Lockhart accuses the spa of making the patients feel worse as it is terrible for their business. As Lockhart continues his accusations, Dr. Vollmer points out his bleeding nose. Lockhart wipes the blood and falls unconscious. Later on, Vollmer checks up on Lockhart. Lockhart notices Hannah's picture on Vollmer's table and inquires about her condition. Vollmer shares how Hannah had a severe trauma when she was young that delayed her development, and it was only when she was 11 years old when she learned how to speak. Vollmer adds that Hannah is like a daughter to him. Vollmer then brings the topic back to Lockhart's condition, claiming he is stressed from work. He recommends hydrotherapy, to which Lockhart agrees. As Vollmer prepares his procedure outside, Lockhart runs through the patient's records and steals Pembroke's file. That night, the nurses start his treatment inside a water tank. As the water fills up, Vollmer reminds him that Lockhart may see primal memories and visions, but they are only the toxins leaving his body. In the tank, Lockhart remembers a childhood memory with his father as they fly a kite. Then, eels begin to fill up the tank, which causes Lockhart to panic. Meanwhile, the technician becomes preoccupied as the nurse comes in and removes her uniform. Lockhart swims up when suddenly his breathing tube is swayed by an eel. He taps the heavy tank's cover and screams for help. Unattended, Lockhart drowns and sinks at the bottom of the tank. While unconscious, Lockhart sees another childhood memory. On a rainy day, his father drove across a bridge where he learned that stocks had plunged, causing many to lose their jobs. His father pulled over and walked towards the bridge's edge. From the car, Lockhart watched his father jump. Lockhart wakes up after being pulled out of the tank. Lockhart tells them that there's something in the water. However, when they check it, the eels are gone. The technician reminds him of what Vollmer said. He might see visions and it's part of the cure. Later that night, as Lockhart studies Pembroke's record, he perceives a man taking a patient to a cave. The following day, Watkins informs Lockhart of what she learned about the Baron. The villagers' attack on the castle wasn't because of the incest, but due to the Baron's medical experiments on the villagers to find a cure for his sick sister. A nurse eventually takes Watkins away for her scheduled treatment, which Watkins is sure she was done with already. This raises Lockhart's suspicions. In exchange for a bike trip into town, Lockhart gives Hannah his ballerina figurine. They travel together and stop at a nearby tavern. Lockhart buys himself and Hannah beers before running into Enrico, who survived the incident and was given a new car and money from the spa. Hannah and Lockhart drink and talk about their family. Hannah tells him that her mother died in a fire and that Hannah, Vollmer, and other staff personnel take vitamins from a small bottle. Later on, Hannah stays and dances to funky German music in front of the other customers. During this, Lockhart stumbles onto a barn with a deaf child sketching the castle fire. Peter, the child's father, who happens to be a practitioner, approaches Lockhart. Lockhart gives him Pembroke's file for him to study. Peter informs him that Pembroke's teeth were falling out due to chronic dehydration, but Lockhart tells him that all they do in the center is drink water. He theorizes that the Baron's experiment 200 years ago that resulted in dehydrated bodies is happening again. However, Peter reveals that the Baron's sister wasn't sick but infertile. Peter then visits a dying cow that feeds on the septic tank of the castle. He slits the cow's stomach open, revealing a dead calf and eels. When Lockhart returns to the pub, he contacts Green, who asks him what happened to him and Pembroke. Contrary to what Vollmer said, Green didn't know about the accident until now. He instructs Lockhart and Pembroke to return to New York within 24 hours. But Lockhart notices a punk dancing behind Hannah. Lockhart tries to pull him away from her, but the punk strikes him. Suddenly, Vollmer appears and saves him as the villagers seem terrified of them. That night, Lockhart's tooth loosens enough for him to extract. He hands it to a staff member who immerses it in water. Lockhart then departs to continue his search for answers. As he moves through the halls, he sneaks at the locked basement where the personnel leaves. He discovers Watkins, who appears dehydrated. She reveals that the Baron's sister was pregnant the night before the wedding. The villagers cut the fetus from her stomach and threw it into an aquifer. Horrified, Lockhart accidentally knocks the bottles behind him, alerting the nurses. As Lockhart escapes, he comes across a chamber where several patients, including Pembroke, are confined in water tanks, seemingly dead. When Lockhart attempts to return to his room, he is apprehended by Vollmer. Lockhart brings up his teeth falling, so they lead him to a dental facility. They strap him down and drill his front tooth. In the following days, after more treatments are done to him, Lockhart begins to act and think like Pembroke. He now believes he's ill and needs to stay for a cure. While composing a memo to his bosses, he experiences a flash of insight and realizes that no man can unsee the truth. Lockhart then breaks a glass and cuts open his cast, revealing that his leg was never broken. He bursts out of his room and dashes toward the small cave, discovering an underground section with a pool where corpses are dumped to feed the eels. At the same time, Hannah heads into the swimming pool and has her first period. Here, eels begin to swim and circle her. Lockhart then finds Hannah across the hallway. Hannah punches Lockhart in the face when he attempts to help her. Hannah flees and discovers Vollmer in a room with the rest eating dinner. Lockhart rushes in and reveals to everyone that Vollmer is a liar and is making everyone sick, using whatever is in the water, which causes their teeth to fall out as a secondary effect. Patients begin to stand, which Lockhart misinterprets as support for him, but they slowly approach and trap him. They all swarm around Lockhart until he collapses. Lockhart awakens in a cylindrical tank that restricts him. Vollmer inserts a tube down his throat and forces him to drink the eel-filled liquid, which Vollmer requires all of his patients to ingest through the water. He reveals that the water contains the newborn eels and, as the eels grow inside the body, the victims are placed in cylindrical tanks. They go through a dehydrating process, where sweat is taken from their bodies and distilled into little blue bottles. This repeatedly happens throughout several sittings, producing the vitamins. The following day, Lockhart has his teeth corrected and looks transformed in the same way the rest of the patients are, trapped in the misconception that he's ill. Vollmer hosts a celebration for the patients and workers that night. For the occasion, Vollmer even buys Hannah a new dress. The staff and nurses dance in white dresses, surrounding Vollmer and Hannah. Meanwhile, Lockhart begins to come to his senses as he recalls what Watkins told him about the Baron. He sees a note written by Watkins, saying she doesn't know. He heads into Vollmer's office and discovers a portrait that was taken sometime after the fire. Lockhart uses glass to magnify a man with bandages all over his face, noticing that the man is holding something at the edge of the photo. Lockhart shatters the frame and unfolds the photo to see the man holding a young girl who looks like Hannah. Back at the celebration, Vollmer leads Hannah into the small cave, where he shows her a portrait of a woman that looks like her. He then ties Hannah to the bed and tells her that he waited too long for that night. Now that she had her period, Vollmer plans to impregnate her to keep their bloodline pure. Hannah is terrified and confused about what he means. Suddenly, Lockhart emerges and pours gasoline onto the carpet. Lockhart accuses him of taking advantage of his own daughter, which gets Hannah's attention. Vollmer pulls the skin off his face, revealing himself to be the horrifically burnt Baron. For a century, the vitamins have kept him and Hannah alive. Lockhart lures Vollmer into a trap where he drops a large amount of fuel and lights him on fire. The fire spreads around Vollmer and reaches throughout the castle. Lockhart attempts to free Hannah, but Vollmer manages to put out the fire on himself and immediately attacks Lockhart. The two fight until Vollmer gets Lockhart close to the eel pool and prepares to kill him, but Hannah swings a shovel across Vollmer's head. He reels backward and falls into the pool where the eels feed on him. Finally, Lockhart and Hannah flee the burning castle while riding Hannah's bike. They crash onto a car ridden by Green, Hollis, and Wilson. Lockhart reveals to them that Pembroke is gone. Green demands Lockhart to get in the car, but he refuses, claiming that he's feeling better. With a nasty smirk on Lockhart's face, he and Hannah ride away into the darkness.